Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live in sync with your cycle? Do you struggle with a negative mindset around your period? Are you wondering if it's possible to be feminist and anti-birth control? We're going to explore these questions and so much more in the Managing Your Fertility podcast, because this is about helping you live a whole and full life. I'm your host and guide, Bridget Busacker, joining you in this journey of exploration related to women's healthcare, feminism, and fertility awareness. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bridget.
So I'm super excited and psyched to have you on. So before we jump into the questions and our topic today, John Capistrant is a Catholic husband and father. He and his wife, Katelyn, will be celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary in July. John teaches middle school language arts and religion at Community of Saints Catholic School in West St. Paul, Minnesota. And along with Kate, he's a catechist for confirmation at St. Peter's Catholic Church in Richfield, Minnesota. John enjoys sports, doing escape rooms, watching classic films, making people laugh, which he's very good at, especially his 11-month-old son, Anthony, and playing strategic board games. So, John, welcome. I'm really excited to have you on. I want you to tell us a bit more about who you are and your interest in just talking honestly about NFP and where that just that desire comes from and what your experiences have led to this point, to just really wanting to see more honest conversations in this space and helping couples really truly embrace their calling in marriage and natural family planning.
Right. And I really appreciate you having me on to talk about this. My hope is just to give a realistic, just that real perspective when it comes to natural family planning, and that perspective that a man has on his side of the issue and why it can be so challenging to accept it and to live it out within marriage, but to also explain the beauty that comes from it too. As you mentioned, I'm a teacher. I love teaching kids, and I also teach confirmation with my wife, Kate. And one thing that we do get to talk about in confirmation is not just talking about the gifts and fruits of the Holy Spirit, especially chastity, but we get to talk about what it means to save yourself for marriage. And we also talk about natural family planning as best as we can, obviously without going into super details on it. But we begin to get that conversation started and for them to start thinking about these things as they move forward with their young lives. And hopefully that's something that will take root and be part of their marriages someday. As you mentioned too, I love playing board games, and been really enjoying watching my little boy grow up. And he's 11 months old now, and I cannot believe that God blessed us with such a beautiful and joyful little boy. He's such a gift to us. So yeah, and just know I'm really excited to be here, and thanks so much for having me on. And I look forward to diving into this issue with you.
And I should say too, we have been friends for a long time.
Yes.
we are. So I think I'm just like hearing both of our professional voices, like, hello, welcome. But it's
right.
like, yeah, we're trying to maintain.
Be real.
we're trying to walk the line of like not too many jokes and
right.
laughter. But I'm excited for this too. Like, we're in a marriage group together, and I have to share too. So you're celebrating your 5th wedding anniversary, July 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And David and I are August 2021. So like month apart, and we were, you guys were like our NFP buddies when we were first married. And I can share this story. Like we had gotten together, we had a great night, we're hanging out, 11 p.m. rolls around, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, can we talk about NFP? And then we were all like, 3-4 months into marriage. Conversation goes on at 2 a.m. We're like, guys, we gotta probably wrap up. We should get to bed. Like, we gotta get home. And I just remember us like praying together and laughing and just being like, it's 2 a.m. and we're like talking super real, making jokes, having a blast, talking about NFP. And it was just like such a gift to be like, oh yes, we have like another couple to talk to you about this, and just like get into this with each other and not be like, what do we do? How do we do this? Oh my gosh, we're alone.
And I remember being really awkwarded out right at the beginning, just wondering like, oh gosh, how are they going to respond? They're practicing this right? And you just don't always know, because not every Catholic couple practices NFP, and it can be really, awkward if it comes up like, oh, we don't know what that is. but I do remember thinking it's really nice to talk to somebody that is sharing in this experience together through the struggles, through the joys of it. And, without getting into explicit details, just sharing with each other what is going well and what's, something that you might need to work on together and pray about. And I just remember we ended that night with prayer together, and I could definitely feel the Holy Spirit in that moment. And it was very just peaceful and beautiful. And now look, we're doing a podcast about this, and you're really diving into this with your organization for managing your fertility. And I just think it's awesome that you've really explored this and you're giving people an opportunity to hear talks about natural family planning and why it's such a great thing to practice as a way for us to bring about life, but also to bring that joy in a marriage with when it comes to the aspect of intercourse. So
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's just been a gift, and I think our friendship has really helped pave the way for me to realize, like, wow. I mean, the amount of times I recommend, like, to women who've reached out, and it's like, if you can find a couple, like, find a buddy, find another couple that you can share in this with and talk to and ask questions and be in the trenches with each other, to ask, not only just to talk about, what's going well, what's not going well, like to pray for each other if you're struggling, just to have that space to know that it's like that sacred, beautiful, safe space that, okay, I can come to these people and I know that they're going to meet me where I'm at, and they're going to help me if I'm struggling, or if I'm thinking this is insane, I don't know why I do this anymore, I want to throw in the towel, and they're like, whoa, let's talk, what's going on. So, like, with this topic, abstinence is a huge huge and tricky topic that I think for a lot of individuals, it's, the question comes up, like, is it okay, is it not okay, like, what is that, how does it fit into natural family planning? And obviously the church, supports and promotes natural family planning, and including abstinence during fertile periods when you're discerning not to have a kid, and that's okay, and that's good. And God made sex is really good. So can you, like, from your perspective as a married man, and just in the process of, going from single, engaged, married, and learning about this, like fast and feast, and just how this plays out now in your marriage, and did you, okay, I'm doing a double whammy question, how that plays out in your marriage, and also, did you learn about NFP when you were younger or beforehand, or was your first experience in the engagement period, so you're really getting that quick and fast learning
great,
process?
great questions. Thank goodness that it did not happen when I was getting engaged. I think a lot of couples go through that and they're like, I have no idea what is NFP. I'm pretty sure I've heard someone say, what's MFP? And it's like, no, you don't even have the acronym. So I'm pretty sure that when you start off, if you can start younger and learn about what it is, you have a better understanding of why it's so important. So as a kid, you run into your mom and dad's room all the time, like, wake up, it's time for us to start the day, let's get some breakfast. And I'd always see my mom taking her temperature, and she'd have, one of those mercury thermometers, and she'd be waving it in the air. And then she had this graph paper on the bed that she'd have the little markings on. And I'm like, what's this, Mom? And she goes, I'm taking my temperature. And that's all she would explain to me. And my mom later on, when I was a teenager, explained what it was and how, the woman can basically keep control of and keep track of what's going on in her own body as a way to know when she is fertile and when she is not. And that there are different times in the month where, when you're married, you can engage in sex during those times and you won't have a child. But you always have to stay open to the possibility that it could always happen. And I really appreciated that my mom taught me that, because that's a big lesson that I think every Catholic man before he gets married needs to understand, is that every time that you engage in sex is an opportunity for you to remember that you need to be open to life in that moment. You need to know that God could bring a child out of this. And so during the dating years, you have these thoughts like, oh gosh, I'm called to be married someday. I'm so excited to, be a part of that. And that's my vocation. And once you know that, you start dating ladies. And again, I dated to pursue someone that I wanted to marry. And when I met Kate, I knew about our first date that I was going to marry her. And so that knowledge, I needed to remember that she was someone that was very important to protect, and that I needed to make sure that I saved myself for marriage. And when I found out that she was saving herself too, that just helped also to know, like, hey, like, there's no pressure right now. We're going to wait till marriage. That's a great thing. And then when it was time to be, when we got engaged, we talked a lot about the idea of NFP and how that would work, and how, yeah, it would definitely be easier to go buy condoms. It's so much easier to do that. But this is the beauty, and we really dove into the beauty of what natural family planning offers. Now, in terms of the fast and the feast, I really like that phrase a lot because it really ties into how it works for the couple that practices NFP religiously, basically. I love when there's this opportunity every month for us to have sex. It is not every night, and that's okay. I used to think when I was dating, wow, we could just have sex all the time. Like, I think that's a common misconception for a lot of men, and maybe some women too. But you can just do it whenever. And that's not the case. That's actually something my dad told me before we were married. He goes, you can't do it all the time. You have to know when you can and when you cannot. If you want to have a child, you can basically go whenever. But if you're going to abstain and wait on a child because it doesn't work for your situation right now, or that's not what God is calling you to have at that point, you need to make sure that you abstain. And so what's wonderful about that is, obviously during Lent, as Catholics, we abstain from meat on Fridays. And we, give up something for Lent. But then at the end, and Easter, we get to come back to, eating meat again on Fridays if you do that. Or whatever you gave up, you can get back, right? So every month it's kind of like a small honeymoon, right? It's like, oh my gosh, like, I get to do this again. And I love that aspect. It makes things become, I guess in a way, the anticipation grows, and it makes it so much better. You really go back to that old phrase, absence makes the heart grow fonder, but I think it should be changed to, for this case, abstinence makes the heart grow
I like
fonder.
that.
So I hope that helps answer some of that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for those struggles too with abstinence, because I think what you're saying is right. Like, when we're oriented and we're focused on loving the other, I mean, this is when abstinence really challenges our self-mastery and our love. Like, am I really loving my spouse when I'm choosing, and you're choosing together in that discernment process of abstaining. Okay, we're choosing this together. It challenges lust so much for both, because it's like, okay, what there are so many reasons, I think, especially when you're dating and engaged, that you're just like, oh my gosh, I just want to, like, rip off your clothes and have a great time, but we're going to save this for marriage. And then in that process, when you're finally married, you're realizing, like, okay, yes, we can rip off the clothes anytime we want, but also, like, when we're incorporating that fasting and that feast, there's still that, it's like temperance, really, and that self-mastery to say, okay, I can't just use you. I really have to um think about, am I loving you, and not like going overboard and overthinking it, but I think it's that call to a higher love. It's that call to really sacrificing and understanding, what does it mean to sacrifice for my spouse, and not being bitter in the process of abstinence, because it's not something that, in most cases, it's not something that's happening. It's never happening to you, but I think, when there are serious concerns why you have to abstain, it can probably feel a lot more imprisoning, versus, we're choosing this, and it doesn't feel as difficult, because it is really clear why you're abstaining. And I think that gray space sometimes can be so challenging, because the church doesn't give us a rubric. It's not like, okay, here's the checklist for everything that you can think about or do. It's really a requirement of that involvement of prayer and loving each other well. So, I hear this from different individuals who reach out to me and ask me, like, what are ways you can love your spouse during times of abstinence, and like what are creative ways to think about it so that you're not just finding yourselves mad sitting on the couch or just turning to TV out of, not out of like, let's have a fun movie night together, but just like, ugh, we can't have sex again, this is so annoying. What would you recommend for couples who are struggling? And I guess too, like in the times, especially for guys, when you're just like, ugh, I can't have sex, this is such a bummer, like how do you reorient your mind? Like how do you reorient to say, how do I love this person, instead of just being mad because I just so desire this person, but I know we're choosing to wait?
Oh, it's such a powerful and challenging aspect that you present right now, because let's just get it on the table. I am a sinner just like everybody else, and I struggle in this area very much because you're desiring that person. And sometimes it's just, I don't know what it is, but there's different times during a cycle where, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I want you right now. And I want to be with you in this way. And it always seems to happen when you are on a trip, or you're somewhere, like you're saying, at a grandparent's house and you can't engage. And it's always been a problem. And I remember early on in our marriage, there was a moment I'm like, honey, please, can we? And she's like, we can't, we're at my grandma's. And I just thought, man. And so that is a very challenging aspect. And so it's something, again, I struggle with still. And some things that I've found that have helped are saying no to myself in other ways. So, for example, if let's say it's like 10 o'clock at night and I want another cupcake, or I'm hungry for something else, or hey, I want to go play a video game. Saying no to myself to maybe go spend time in prayer or to go read a book, doing something that I really want to do and saying no to myself can actually help build you up. So just like when you work out, you're not going to go and do 100 push-ups right off the bat when you're first starting to work out and getting into a workout routine. You're going to build yourself up with starting with 5, 10. So starting with those other ways outside of sex and saying no to those can really help build you up when it becomes time, when it's like, I really want you, I'm desiring you greatly. I also have learned a lot from St. Joseph in the past couple years, and St. Joseph has been a real model to me about how to love and want what is best for the other person, desiring the good of the other. That's the definition of love that I've always been told, and I love that idea. And I think St. Joseph is that I don't want to say perfect, but maybe I do say perfect, but that perfect model for men and also for women too, of how do you love someone in a different, deeper way, especially when you might have those desires to want to be with that person, right? And so in those times when we do, my wife and I, as you know, and we've played with you before, we love board games. And so that's one of our go-tos, is we specifically set aside time where we'll go, hey, let's go play this game together. Now, there are definitely times when we are frustrated with each other because we really want each other, and you start to maybe kiss and you're just like, we got to stop. And that's happened so many times when one of us has to be strong and stop us and say, hey, let's go for a walk, let's play a board game. But I do think what can really help is when you know that it's times when you are really wanting each other, set aside a time when you have a planned date. So one thing Kate and I have recently done is we bought I can't remember the exact name of the book, but it's an adventure book where you scratch off a date and you get all the things that you need and you just go and do it. And then we also bought a Polaroid camera, because as part of that is you take a picture and it's a way to remember. So having specific planned dates can really help with that. And also maybe just giving the other person some time to themselves too. We've found that really helps, where maybe Kate will take a bath and I'll take care of Anthony during that time, and she really appreciates that. And that's a way to love. And it's simple, and I know I've brought this up a lot in our marriage group with you and you always laugh at me, but doing the dishes, that has always been my thing where I show that I love, because at night you're just like, I don't want to do this. And you can force yourself to do something positive like a chore, and that can take your mind off of, the desire for sex when you're keeping your mind busy. I have found that if you are, a struggle with this though is when you really are desiring each other, be careful what you watch. If you're like, we're going to watch a good movie or a show together, I would be very careful with what you watch, because there's a lot of things that could make you want to engage even more so. And just to be weary of that. So be on your guard, but to ask St. Joseph to be your guide and to just make sure that you have a plan. It's really important to have this plan in place and be on it together. One idea that Kate and I have actually talked about recently is having a visual of a calendar for, what we think the cycle of the month is going to be. And we use the symptothermal method, looking at the mucus and also Kate takes her temperature. And so that's a great way for me to kind of have a visual, because I'm not always checking the app. I have access to the app, but I think having that in a spot where we're constantly seeing it, and hopefully no one else that comes in our house sees that, because you don't really want that. But having that access to it and that visual can actually help you to remember, hey, we got to be extra careful on these days. This is when we normally want to really be with each other, and that can also help with your battle plan. So it's going to look different for every couple. So you got to make sure that the key is to communicate with each other. This isn't something where the wife is doing all the work with charting and keeping tabs on what's going on with her own body, and the man is just sitting there going, well, can we have sex now? That's not how it works. And so you got to make sure that you're communicating with each other and being open with each other. So yeah, that's it. I think that's some of the things that we do that have really helped us. I think the last thing I forgot to mention was just one thing we love to do is build Legos together. So whatever your thing is with your spouse, whatever activities you enjoy, really try to do those during the time so that that you can't engage in sex, or you're choosing not to because you're waiting to have a child. And so make a plan and have it be fun plans. Make those dates really fun for each other.
You said so many great things, and I want to tap into, because I know I've seen some people say like, don't tell us just to play board games. And I'm like, you guys are like the king and queen of board games. Like, you guys don't understand how amazing their house is. Like, they're the fun house, and they have like this room of board games, and like you guys have just like this space. Like, you truly love playing together, and you're the ones that bring super fun games to parties. So like, if board games are your thing, do board games. And I love what you said, just like think outside the box, think about different ways to plan. Like, I like what you said, it's like a battle plan. It's figuring out, okay, let's look at the chart, let's see what's going on, like what do we actually like to do together. And that just is like what's so beautiful with you and Kate. Like, you guys know we love building Legos together, we love building board games. We found, even just like knowing the chores that you maybe don't love to do, but the other would appreciate it, that just that reminder that great sex doesn't happen just in the bedroom or wherever you may do it. It happens through the different ways in which you communicate with each other, and how you're loving the other person, if it's in through chores, or recognizing, hey, my spouse needs alone time, or this, I know, like, this is something that they do all the time, but I'm going to step in and help them. If it's a lot of times, I think for married couples, it stems around like a lot of those household chores. And I really want to emphasize, that plan that you said, just like plan ahead, like look and see, okay, what does the chart look like? It's saying, like, what do we know about ourselves? Like, what do we know, or maybe those points where we struggle? Because I think someone might hear this and think like, oh, you're frustrated, like just have sex. Like, why are you waiting? Like, isn't that sign enough that, like, God wants you to like just be together and have a baby? It's like, well, that's such a personal decision. And that's something that you also have to take to prayer, because if you're realizing over and over again, like, wow, I'm just so frustrated, I'm so frustrated, I'm so frustrated, it's like, well, what's going on? What gets at the heart of that? And I think that's where the beauty of NFP really does come into play, and the goodness of it, because it really is challenging. Like, what is that frustration? It's not just that I can't have sex with my spouse. Like, what's really going on? Like, what am I desiring? Like, what is holding me back from loving this person? And if I can't get creative, or I'm realizing, maybe there's grounds to say, hey, are we really, abstaining for the right reasons? I mean, birth control is not going to do that for you. It's really easy, like you said, it's just use a condom and go, but it's not going to allow for these deeper conversations. And again, really looking to see, okay, what am I being challenged in? Like, what are the ways in which I'm actually just not loving my spouse well, or I'm being really selfish and I'm not understanding the ways in which I could love them better and and that it's good that we're challenged in that. I think sometimes this, like, when individuals hear this, they're like, this sounds terrible. And it's like, well, it's not always fun, but the beauty is that we're growing, and the love that we have for each other is growing to build a really good and strong foundation. And of course, what
Right.
you said, communication. I mean, it's so critical in so much of what we've read in our marriage group and talked about. I mean, it's communication. It's like when you lack that communication and you lack that ability to say, even if it's saying like, I'm really frustrated, we can't have sex. That's something David and I will say to each other. And it's like it just builds it builds up, and you're not saying it. And finally you just say it, and it's like relief of like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Like, yeah, I actually am really feeling that this is hard. And then you start to kind of go back to like, okay, well, let's remember like why we're doing it, and what we found, like, here are reasons why. And in the moment, it's not really the best time, but obviously it's up to each couple to like change your decision for abstaining, but it might be. But for the most part, it's like, okay, let's be honest with each other, and let's revisit this if we need to. But let's pivot. Like, what are ways that we can love each other, that would really make us, feel fulfilled, feel loved by the other, and not find that, we're just using each other. Because I think that's ultimately what it really shows in that frustration and in that annoyance. It's like, whoa, I think I'm really just wanting to use my spouse for myself. And it's not really to
Right.
love them well. It's just because I want to feel good.
Yes. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I was thinking about while you were talking. And I remember early on in our marriage, we're still new to natural family planning. We have no idea what we're doing. Had a couple moments where we're like, uh-oh, do we just make a baby? And so I remember very early on, you have that time frame where you can. And so with symptothermal, we have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And so basically all during phase 2, you need to avoid because you have fertile mucus, and that, you have to realize, like, if you engage in sex, there's a probability that you could have a baby. And so if you're planning your family, and working with the Lord, obviously, remember, this is all working with God. And I think that's so important to remember, is that there's 3 of you and you're working together to create life. And so during that time, if you're not feeling called by the Lord to have a child, it's very important to abstain during those times. But then when phase 3 rolls around, you're like, hey, for lack of better terms, it's the green light. I got the go ahead. And I remember that I had this unrealistic expectation that we were going to have sex every night. And
Mm.
that was not fair to Kate. And, as awkward as it is to say it out loud now, I think it's also important that people hear this. Like, don't have that expectation that, you know, you're just gonna all of a sudden, when it's time, when you can, that it's going to happen every night. That's not fair to your spouse. That's a very unfair expectation to put upon them. And that's something that we really talked a lot about. We had, discussions over, we cried over, and we've worked it out now where that's not a problem for us anymore. We understand. And it's, like I said earlier, love is about wanting what is the best for the other person, wanting the good of the other. And if your spouse is exhausted from the day, they're not going to want to come home and engage in those in sex with you. They're not going to engage in those activities with you that sex has to offer, because they're tired. And you have to be understanding about that. And I think that's something that I've learned in marriage. I also think it's important not to give that heavy sigh when you're like, like, come on, like, not putting that pressure. That's also a way that's not loving the other person. That's being very selfish. And again, that's something I've struggled with as well. And so if you're hearing this, for those that are listening and you aren't married yet, or you're engaged, keep that in mind, that don't have those unrealistic expectations, because you'll be pleasantly surprised when you don't have those expectations. So I think that's actually one of the ways that I think husbands can really be supportive and stay positive with NFP, along with this idea too of making sure that you're checking in with your wife. Every once in a while, I'll tell Kate, honey, thank you so much for, she wears, I'm going to do a little product placement. I hope that's okay, called
Oh,
Temp
yeah.
Drop. Temp Drop. She uses a Temp Drop, and basically it's a basal temperature thermometer that goes around her arm, and it's just a little band, and she puts it on at night, and that's all she gets to do, and it communicates with an app on her phone, and it automatically takes her temperature so that she can correctly chart. And there'd be times we switch to that. It's expensive, but very much worth it if you haven't used one before. But we used other thermometers, and she'd have to get up early and have to take her temp. Sometimes she'd forget and it would throw off her charts. But one way that it was really hard for me to purchase that, because I'm going, that thing's so little, it costs so much money. But I knew that that would allow her to sleep in a little bit longer, and it would take away the stress of having to worry about every day getting up and taking your temp at a certain time. And that was one way for me, at least, to be supportive, but then also just to say thank you so much for always doing this with me. I'm just so blessed that I have a wife who works with me on this. We work on this together, and I always can do better by checking in and seeing where she's at, and trying not to say it as a way to say, hey, so, is it almost time yet? Trying to make sure I'm not saying it that way, but being supportive. And especially after when we had our baby, that was a very challenging time. As always, you have to wait a long time, and it takes a while for the woman's body to come back to normal after having a baby. So there's a lot of abstinence that goes on, and a lot of prayer that you need, especially during those times. And people had, I don't want to say warned me, but a lot of my buddies who had babies before me told me about those things, and that really helped too. So being supportive of your wife by being patient with her, checking in, and just saying thank you for the choices that she's making along with you can really add a lot to your marriage.
I really love that. And I think, just remembering that you're a team, and just to build up your teammate, and just acknowledging like, wow, thank you for wearing this thermometer. Like, thank you for doing this, like, and for working with me to like figure this out together. Because I think it can be, it can be hard if you do like forget to, like, I remember, so we've used Symptothermal in the past, and now we use Marquette. And I remember the times where I just like forgot, like I slept through an alarm, or in the rush of getting up, and I, just started going with my day, and was not, thinking, oh my gosh, yeah, I've got to take my temperature. And just, in the ways that David was really patient, like, okay, let's, can I help you tomorrow? So you do it. It wasn't like, oh, how did you forget again? And just, there were those moments of frustration for sure, where we had to talk about it and be like, okay, instead of like getting frustrated, like, how can we help each other? Like, how can you help me? And so that was, just being solutions oriented, because I think it can be tempting to, want to blame, or to think like, oh, you didn't do it, are you doing this on purpose, like what's going on, like why did you forget, sex is so important, like we're so close, like all those, I think all those emotions and those feelings can come flooding in. But like you said, to just really, you know be solutions oriented, and figuring out, okay, how can we how, especially as a husband, how can I support my wife in doing this, and so that she feels she has what she needs to take her temperature, or pee on a stick in the morning, or put this into an app. And like you had said, you have the app on your phone, and David's the same way, where he's got the app on his phone, so he can be checking too. And that really helped me to not feel totally alone, like I owned all this information, and then I was the person to be like, okay, we're good for sex, or we're not, because that's a really weird feeling, to feel like you're the gatekeeper of intimacy, when it really is a shared responsibility.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because my wife Kate is very much that same phrase came up, and we've had throughout our whole marriage. There's been times where you really want each other, and you start making out, and things just start building up, and it gets to a point where you go, one of us needs to stop, and we need to, how wonderful it would be for the man to say, hey, we need to stop. Or what's even better, right, is for that man to not put them, to try to keep them out of that situation from happening. And it's something that I've definitely had to work on, and I still work on all the time, because I love my wife, and there's that innate desire in me, and I want to please her. I want to give myself completely to her. She's the one that God made for me, and I love her completely. And I want to, but I'm not loving her if it causes us to, build ourselves up and then we have to stop. We always, Kate and I have this common metaphor and this idea of, you're building a campfire, right? Don't light a fire that you can't keep burning, right? Don't light that fire that you can't keep burning. If you're lighting a fire and you just keep putting on wood, and all of a sudden you're just like, wait, we need to douse this with water. Okay. It causes a lot of frustration. It can cause tears and pain and arguments. And then that's just not fun for anybody. So it's important to keep that in mind, that, don't let that fire keep burning if you can't let it burn. I think that's a really important thing to keep in your mindset, and you're going to have to change your mindset if that's something that you want to do all the time. If you're like, I don't care, I'm going to try it and see what happens. Well, that's not the right way to go about it. So hopefully that's a good idea, or a good metaphor for people to think about when it comes to, hey, I want to engage. Oh, is this something I can keep burning? It's really helped me over the years to think about that, and just to kind of make sure that I'm keeping my desires in check, but then not like completely wiping out those desires. Instead, saying, "Hey, honey, can I just give you a hug, or could we cuddle? Could I give you? I'm going to give you a kiss, and I'm going to say I love you, and we're going to just either cuddle and go to bed, or we're going to go do something else." Remember that desire and love isn't just shown through sex. I think that's something that I wish someone would have told me more when I was dating, and especially when I was engaged. It's not all about the sex. As a man, you think about it a lot. You really do, and it's normal. Obviously, you're not thinking about it really at work because you're doing other things, but that's the thing, like keeping your mind busy, not keeping your mind idle, staying off your phone, for long periods of time. If you're on your phone for long periods of time, you're going to get bored. And when you get bored, you're going to want to engage in sex. Sometimes it just comes up naturally, like, hey, honey, you look good. Come over here. I'm bored. Right. Those things have definitely happened for me. So as a man, I think it's really important that we have to keep those desires in check, to show our love in a respectful and responsible way that really makes your wife feel loved. That I know that when I cuddle with her, or I give her a kiss on the forehead, or I give her a big hug or a massage without wanting anything in return, that means the most to her. So hopefully that can help some people that are thinking, especially husbands, like, how do you stay supportive during this time in like practical ways?
Yeah, I love the practicals, because I think sometimes this conversation can stay so high level, and it's like, okay, but now how do I do it? Or like, and it's not, again, it's not like, here's the checklist. It's just, here's some ideas to get you thinking, use this as a jumping off point to say, okay, gosh, what would my wife love? What would my husband love? Like, what would be something they would really appreciate and mean a lot to them? What would you recommend to husbands when it comes to, I guess, for lack of a better word, like an attitude shift around NFP? When you're struggling and you're frustrated, or you're just kind of like, ugh, this is the worst. How do you like really work through that? I mean, because sometimes it takes like some serious rewiring and new, like telling yourself some new scripts of like, okay, this is what NFP is. Like, okay, how do I really, love my wife well?
Right. And that attitude shift can come in multiple ways. One way it can definitely happen for men is you're walking through the grocery store, like Target or Walmart, and you're in the aisle with, there's condoms and all those other things, and you're going, man, I could just buy those and have sex whenever I want. Right. I feel like I've had that thought. I've definitely had that thought. And then I go, no, I'm, why would I even think that way? It's kind of like the devil tempting me, that conversation you have in your head. And I immediately always say no, because if you have it all the time, it's going to lose its value. It's going to lose what it means. And to me, honestly, using those things can become like using, your wife becomes an object, and I don't want to use her as an object. So I think keeping that in mind is, remember that your wife is a temple of the Holy Spirit. Her body is beautiful. You can admire her body and her beauty, but you need to respect her body and her beauty. And that comes with changing the way that your mind is thinking about sex. And the other way too is making sure that what you're watching and what you're absorbing. I'm a really big person about what you take in affects you and changes you. So if you're taking in, you're watching shows that they show complete nudity, they show sex scenes, your mind as a man especially is going to be thinking about those things, and then you're going to want to emulate them and say, hey, well, like, you're not exactly saying this out loud, but with your body, whatever you saw on TV, or you're watching pornography, those kinds of things can then affect you, and you want to act it out. And sometimes it's maybe not during the best time of the month to act those things out. Obviously, in sex, there's, like you said at the beginning, there is no rule book. But I do think that there's this innate idea that we need to respect the other person and their desires. So as a man, you need to protect your wife in terms of what you're doing in the bedroom, and also protecting your heart and your mind. So if you're taking in, again, like those things, those images that you see that are like those impure images that you're watching on TV, get that out of your life, because it's going to affect your marriage. Sex is not like it is on TV. I remember a friend of mine said, yeah, it's not like it is in the movies, man. It's pretty messy. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, because I was just engaged at the time. And he's right. It is messy. And let's just be real. It's very messy. And you have to, that's just part of what it is. But it's a beautiful act. And so husbands out there, you got to remember, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's not bad. I think there's a lot of like negative connotations out there that sex is bad. But it is a wonderful thing, and it was intended for marriage. And I tell my students this. I was actually just talking to my students about this today in my religion class, that God intended sex for marriage. He didn't want us to have one night stands. He didn't want us to just go around with whoever. He intended it because right away, before we got married, my favorite word about learning about sex was the exclusivity. Like it's just you and God and your wife. And I just loved that. There isn't anybody that's a part of that. So remember that when it comes to this shift, before you even approach NFP, you've got to change your heart and your mind to want what's best for your wife. And then NFP is going to come pretty easily to you if you can want that. You're gonna have to say no to yourself, and that's hard to do. It's really hard to say, oh God, my wife is looking pretty darn good tonight and I really want her. But you also got to say no to yourself, and a lot of times, and go do something else and show your love in a different way. So hopefully that can kind of help with that attitude shift. But just remember that God designed our bodies, and it's okay, right? It's a good thing to know our bodies, and for a woman to know when she's fertile, to know when she's not fertile, can really help. I remember when we were trying for a baby, we got pregnant the second month of trying because Kate knew when she was fertile, when was a good time to engage in sex so that we could have a child. And she was so good at charting, she's so good at it, that she knew the due date exactly. So when the doctor was like, we already know the due date, and the doctor's like July 15th. We were like, yep, we already have that. I said June 15th because Anthony came a month early, a little stinker. But so he's trying to prove his mommy wrong. But you've got to change that mindset. So again, it starts in the heart. It's also in the mind. And so what we take in can really affect that. And so if you're sitting and watching porn, or you're watching shows that have a lot of sex in them, you need to rethink the shows you're watching, especially eventually when you have children. They're just going to wander in the room. You want them to see those kinds of things? No,
Mm-hmm.
It's going to affect you. And if you're doing those things, it's going to be really hard to practice NFP faithfully.
I just love all the practicals that you provide and just the different ways for, really call to action for, um, the men who are listening or for the women who are listening thinking, I'm sending this one to my spouse or my fiance, because I think it's just so good. And just your honesty is so great because I think so often we're very timid and we don't hear about this in marriage prep. It's just very high level or fluffy. You're like, oh yeah, 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 you'll figure it out. And it seems to be that they're the lucky ones who get a really great, mentor couple or marriage prep where they have these honest conversations and really being called onward to say, okay, if you're watching things that don't help you, that are really hindering you and they're impure, and we get so uncomfortable hearing that because it's like, well, we're adults, like what, like whatever, like that's not a big deal, like what are we talking about, impurity, that's like, that sounds so like so old and old school and just like of the past, but it's true. Like you said, what we take into our minds impacts our hearts, and it works together, they work together, so that if we're watching things that really aren't stirring us to think of good and beautiful things, we're just totally going to be stuck in the dirt and mad, and we're going to be frustrated, I think, more often than not with NFP. And that doesn't mean, if you get rid of these things, like NFP will never be frustrating, but eliminating, I think, those obvious things, and just really thinking critically about like what is holding me back and what are things that maybe I just need to root out can make a difference, in the process of charting and in the process of figuring out NFP as a couple. I remember during engagement, I had it wasn't like a marriage mentor or like an engagement mentor, but I really look back and think, oh, she was totally that for me. And she had said that the devil tries everything he can to bring you together before marriage and sex, and does everything he can to pull you apart from each other in marriage when it comes to sex. And I remember thinking, like, what? And now being married, it's like, wow, there was just this like desire to be really physically with each other when we were engaged and when we were dating. And then when we got married, it was so bizarre to both of us that, I think in this comfort and this beauty of our marriage, there was also this tendency to just be very passive or almost like flippant with NFP and intimacy, and thinking like, oh, it's like, the dessert, it's the thing you can do once you've been an adult and you do all the adult married things, when really it's such an integral part of the relationship. Like sex is such a gift, like you were saying, it's not bad. And unfortunately, porn culture, purity culture, it really can impact the way in which we think about that. And it's so important to call that out, to be honest, to have these honest conversations with our spouses, and as needed with spiritual directors and therapists, if it's like, hey, this is really rooted deeply and really getting in the way of me loving my spouse well. I think just to be aware of those spaces and to recognize, the devil's going to try to twist something that's super good. He's trying to
Right.
everything.
Right.
Um,
And I think I would be remiss to say if I didn't bring up um, the book that we always laugh about, but it actually holds a very deep truth within two words. Um, just for lack of a long story, Bridget has a book that I saw on her shelf a long time ago, and it said "Holy Sex," and it was in all red and just stood out from her bookcase. But I think, and it's a book I own now too. But just that idea, like sex is holy. It's not dirty. It's not bad. um, we can we can engage in sex at a time that is not meant for us, before marriage and things like that. I want to say too that if you're a man listening to this, or a woman, if that's happened to you, there is healing, and God can heal all those things and make you new again. So don't think you can't come into a marriage, with that holiness still. But sex is so holy, and natural family planning allows you to dive deeper into the holiness, right? To know that your bodies, you're working together with God to create a child, or to engage, right? Sex is both unitive and procreative, and I think both of those aspects are so important for Catholic couples to remember, right? It can be fun, right? There's going to be times
yes,
when it's fun, there's times
exactly.
when it's not fun, and you're like, okay, that was really, I don't know what happened there. And so, but it's a wonderful thing, and I just want to make sure that people understand that it's fun, it's wonderful, but altogether it's holy. And God creates that to remind us that of that connection between heaven and ourselves, and he wants to unite us together in those moments. And so Just stay strong. And for the men out there, I want to make sure I encourage you to know that you can do this. It is possible, and it's wonderful, and you can do it. So really let those words sink in. If you're on the fence and you're thinking, okay, if you're getting engaged and your wife to be is saying, we really got to practice natural family planning. You need to discover the why. You have to figure that out for yourself, and talk to your own father, or to a brother in Christ. Talk to a priest, or do some research on your own. But you have to discover why you are going to do this yourself, and be that commitment. Without that commitment to it, you're going to falter, and it's not going to be what you want to, what your spouse is wanting you to do, and what God wants us to do. He wants us to be open to life at every time that we engage in sex. He wants us to enjoy the other spouse, right? And so just know that sex is amazing, but you need to have the right mindset. So it's really up to you men out there that are hearing this, that you have to change your mindset on it and stay positive with it. And remember, like I said before, you can do it. You can do this.
John, this was great. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing everything, just sharing your own experiences, and really calling men onward, and just giving the practicals, providing some really tangible ways to build the toolbox, because I think like the NFP toolkit is so essential, and being able to figure out, okay, how do I do this? What do I need to be doing? What can I think about? What questions should I be asking myself? Because that self-work is so important and a critical part of using NFP, especially as a couple. I mean, it's huge. So thank you so much for being on. You're awesome. And this was just great to be able to have other individuals hear your voice, because you're just a gem. You and Kate are awesome, and you always have so much to share with our marriage group, and it's so good. So I'm grateful that listeners are going to be able to hear more from you.
Thank you. And we're both very blessed to know you and David, and for the listeners to know we're actually your little daughter Felicity's godparents, and we're so blessed to be seen as that like very important couple in your life. And so we're honored and can't wait to meet your new little one coming very, very soon. So thanks again for having me on. I really hope that God has used me as a way, and I just want listeners to know too, like, this is an imperfect man. I struggle. I have a lot of struggles in these areas. But I do know what God is calling me to, and calling us all to do, so that we can love one another as best as possible. Just as Christ loved the church, that's how we as spouses need to love each other, and die to ourselves quite often, every day, to make sure that the other person feels loved and respected. So thanks again so much for having me on, Bridget.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and help expand the conversation around women's health. If you'd like to learn more about fertility awareness, visit www.managingyourfertility.com for more information, resources, guides, and so much more.